everyone. My name's Jane Winters from the School of Advanced Study, and I'm one of the co-investigators on the Heritage Connector project. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the digital humanities themes and strands that run through the project. One of the starting points was to do a literature review to look at where the project is situated within that wider landscape. What are we doing that's new? What are we doing that builds on existing work? And what's that kind of interaction between existing knowledge and what we're doing? Because as John mentioned, we're not actually developing completely new software and approaches, but we are iterating and adapting. So from that literature review, some of the findings are that the different motivations to working with linked open data, and we've touched on a lot of this today, a concern to make cultural heritage more visible, an interest in exposing hidden collections or hidden aspects of relatively well-known collections, and I'll come back onto that a bit later, the enrichment of catalogues and metadata, encouragement of data reuse in new contexts, the desire to create a better user experience, and I don't think we're anywhere near that yet, but we're starting to work towards it, and one which empowers patrons to draw their own conclusion about cultural heritage artifacts. And then so fundamentally, the challenges of dealing with ever-growing volumes of data, particularly when we have fewer and fewer resources to handle that. It emerged as generally a shared vision of multiple institutions collaborating to merge their data together, as we're doing with the V&A, but many of the projects that I was looking at only involve one or at most two institutions, and international collaboration is still quite rare. So the scaling up required towards the national collection really is something quite new. I won't have to tell most of you this, cultural heritage databases are rich, large and complex, and there's limited standardization, and that can happen even within organizations. And institutional histories and culture can make that standardization challenging. It's not just a technical problem, there are other questions and factors at work. And the barriers to linked open data in the cultural heritage sector were defined as falling into three broad areas: technical, conceptual, and legal. Nobody actually mentioned the financial side of this in the literature that I was looking at, but I think that's an absolutely crucial point as well, the resources in order to do all of this work. There was widespread agreement that this is time-consuming and resource-intensive. Particularly data preparation, data cleaning, and so on. So we're hoping that we can streamline some of that, but you will have seen already that it is still a very resource-intensive process, even when you're using machine learning. Something that is of real interest for us in this project is that a lot of linked open data work to date has focused on people rather than objects, for the very good reason that, as you've been seeing from Callian, it's easier to link people. And objects are at the heart of the museum collections, and a lot of them are not unique objects, so how are we going to handle that? It's also not a question of if human intervention and curation is needed. That narrative of artificial intelligence replacing people and human expertise is absolutely not true. But at what point in the pipeline can we mobilize that human expertise most effectively? So what are the most useful human contributions? And how does this vary across potential contributing groups? And what part does co-creation have to play in enhancing the data that we have? These are not questions we're really going to address in the Heritage Connector, but we hope to be able to pick them up in the Congruence Engine project subsequently. And many of the linked open data projects that I was looking at have envisaged personalization as a really important outcome and allowing people to pick their own pathways through the data. But that has been talked about more than it's been achieved. And it's definitely a mid to long-term goal and something that we would hope to work towards, but that's not going to happen at an early stage in the project. And finally, quality, authority, and trust are absolutely crucial for cultural heritage organisations, and concern that the data is accurate and reliable, the confidence measures that we were talking about. But that has tended to be seen as a bit of a block on experimentation, and it also presents a challenge for scalability. So trying to move past that and to think about what we're able to do with volume without losing and compromising that trust is something a project like this is really quite centrally concerned with. So overall, there's been numerous really promising experiments across the sector, and they've produced really suggestive results for how we can take things forward. But it's been pretty rare for those to move beyond the prototype stage. And a few years on, you will nearly always find these projects and initiatives in a labs or beta section on a website rather than being having put in as business as usual. Other aspects that the digital humanities strand are concerned with is really ethical and inclusive research. And I know that Abby brought this up in the chat. How can we avoid reinforcing existing hierarchies in the data? The people and objects who are already well catalogued and well described are much easier to link and will be present in other places as well, like in Wikidata. So how can we get around that? So it's important for us to consider both the presence of absence and the absence of presence in our data, and how we can visualize gaps and silence those and make sure that we're working to address those. And it's also the case that bias can't be avoided. You quite often hear discussions in data science, for example, about removing bias, but bias is there. This is all created by humans originally. So how do we identify, acknowledge, and take account of it rather than trying to strip it away, because we're not going to be successful in doing that. And thinking about recognition of and credit for all forms of contribution to the project, being an open, generous project that acknowledges input and expertise wherever we find it. And some of the work today that was going on to identify and spot where the connections have been made wrongly, how do we accredit that when we're involving large numbers of people in improving our data? And that connects particularly strongly onto the systemic action research approach that we're going to be adopting for Congruence Engine. Open knowledge is also crucial in all of this, and we've been trying to embrace what I think of as radical openness. So from project inception to the publication of final outputs, not just thinking about open access publishing at the end of a cycle. So we've been really careful to document and talk about in public the project methods and the thinking of the project team. And there's a lot of that information on the Heritage Connector blog that you will have seen. I was going to say we have 11 blog posts, but actually they're much more like, not even short articles in some cases. They're really detailed and thoughtful pieces which talk about how we've got to where we've got to. And there are various means of sharing data and code and exchanging knowledge. So there's a YouTube channel. We've had a public Zotero library from the start, which contains all of the information that's fed into the literature review, and a GitHub repository with all of the code. So we have a commitment to open access publication wherever that's possible, and working towards the provision of fair data, that is data which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, so that other people can build on our work and answer questions that we haven't even thought of. And finally, something that I'm really interested in is navigation and discovery through visualization. So exploring alternative routes into GLAM collections at scale. So that's really thinking about moving away from both keyword searching and structured browsing, because keyword searching really starts to break down when you have high volume. They both still have their place. If you just want to find one piece of information, you don't want to be worrying about navigating through a visualization, but visualization can do different things, and it helps to represent the range and scope of the collections in a way that you don't get through typical access methods. So we want to use visualization not just as a means of communicating complex research results, but as a valuable tool for research in itself. And I think visualization as a way to highlight silence is something that we're really interested in exploring. Where are those gaps, and are there unexpected gaps as well? So thinking about how we might visualize that absence in our collections. And it's also a way of developing methods for navigation and discovery that cross language boundaries, so that they're more accessible to people who aren't working in an Anglophone environment as well. So those are the key things for us to think about and look at around the digital humanities strand. And I think and hope that they intersect with a lot of what we've been talking about already this morning. So thank you.